Tutwoma. How are you? And welcome to Your Journey Matters. This is Dorcas Glader, the African in Ecuador. So, um, for those of you who don't know, I am a multilingual African. And today's video is inspired by my journey as a self-taught language student and what language learning has taught me, my experiences, and where the inspiration came from. You know, um, one of the things that caught my attention when I was in South Africa was the fact that their native languages were widely spoken and used than the lingua franca, which is English. And at the time, it wasn't something I appreciated because I didn't speak any of the native languages. And so we were kind of easily excluded from so many things just by the fact that we didn't speak any of the local languages. It was easier for Southern Africans to integrate into the society because most of the languages around that region sound similar, making it easier to pick up one of the 9 official languages of the country. So um, it really brought my attention to the role language plays in the culture of a person and also in your learning process. Now, only when I left my country or when I left the shores of Africa did it begin to make sense or did I begin to appreciate the fact that one spoke one's biological, did I say biological? One's own cultural language, you know. So, as an African on another shore, I was forced to learn Spanish because I live in a Spanish speaking country. And after that, I began to appreciate more my parents' lingua franca, which is French. And for an African, I realized that I do not have a high proficiency in any of the African languages that I speak or that I know, which linguistically makes me feel lacking, you know, as an African. So my parents were born and raised in the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then they moved to Nigeria, where they founded their own family. Now, in Nigeria, I was born there. We speak Hausa, we speak over 400 languages, with three of them being the major languages, which is Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba. Okay, so we speak Hausa, and I learned Hausa in my grandfather's compound, and my mom would speak French to me. So when my dad joined us, he'd wanted us to learn his own language, you know. So my mom speaks the language or spoke the language. They are both deceased, but she didn't see the need for it because we were living in another language. Rather, they chose to focus on teaching us the international languages that they spoke, which is French and English, because they felt at the time with those two languages you could go to basically many parts of the world. So it was like a ticket to the world, which somehow is true because thanks to my background in French, I was able to quickly learn Spanish. Okay, but um, when you become bilingual or multilingual, you begin to understand how a people's culture reflects in their language, and then you begin to realize that even though it's just one aspect, language is a very integral and very important part of a nation's culture, of their heritage. Okay, so I began to remember why in South Africa many people would speak their native tongue than to speak the white man's language, as we call it all over Africa. Like English is the white man's language, French is the white man's language. Okay, so there are even schools over there where the language of instruction is the native language outrightly. And so, for those of us who go to school who are literate, you will find that we would be speaking our native languages and then we would be speaking the lingua franca. Okay, so you will find that almost every African, if not all, speaks some language outside of an international language, which on the African continent would be English, French, or Portuguese, and a very small number of people speak, I think, Spanish. It was only when I came here I realized that there was a place in Africa where they speak Spanish, you know. For Arab, that is the language of the Muslim world. So I think a lot of people speak Arabic, I'm not sure. But it's the norm. You would find that most Africans are generally bilingual, minimal. So for people like us who come from intercultural marriages, we would speak our mother tongue, our father tongue, and then the language spoken in the community where we were raised. I had a lot of friends who were born, who originated from eastern Nigeria, but because they lived in northern Nigeria, they spoke Hausa. And the same way you have the Hausas who settled in the east speaking Igbo, or they would speak Yoruba, or people from the Niger Delta will speak Yoruba, will speak English, and then every Nigerian speaks pidgin English. That is a given, you know. When I went to Congo, I found the same thing, that because of work and school, you know, people were transferred to different parts of the country during the Mobutu regime, so that you were from the north, but you were sent to work in the south or southwest, and to integrate yourself, you had to learn the language, and so you understood one another. So you had to learn the languages. You know, in South Africa, however, the dynamics I found very interesting is that not only do they learn each other's languages, but they understood one another's languages. I don't get that mechanics, but it's very fascinating to watch. What am I trying to say? So, say for example, someone is speaking Portuguese and the other person is speaking Spanish, and they are having a normal, interesting conversation, and nobody's switching to the other person's language, but they are understanding that. Whereas in Western Africa, I would have to either speak French or you would have to speak Spanish to me, because we understood that. But that is the dynamics in South Africa. And I noticed another thing is that with the advent of technology and the widespread of English language, we are gradually losing our languages, our native languages, so much so that it is the norm for those of us who are city dwellers to not speak the native language, especially if your parents were raised in the city, also attended foreign schools. You know, there is that thing to say you are, I'm sorry to use the term, but kind of inferior if you don't speak standard lingua franca, if you don't speak the white man's language properly. And so you would see that, like back home, we were not allowed to speak Pidgin, which is native to Nigeria, because it wasn't to the white man's standard, so to say, because it wasn't the language of instruction at school. So parents wanted us to, you know, perfect our English. And I think about almost a decade ago, it became even worse, with schools selling that as their sales point to parents, that they were teaching their children, they would teach their children British English or American English, you know, and there was no school saying, no, if your child comes to our school, they're going to learn Igbo or Yoruba. I come from a generation where it was mandatory for you to learn one official language of Nigeria. You either had to learn Hausa or Yoruba or Igbo. And that was very good. That was very rich. It is very, very um, integral. Now, when I began to learn foreign languages, I began to find out why languages form a huge part of our culture, and that is because you can hear from our expressions how we think about certain things, how we conceptualize certain things. For example, in English language, we would say, make me understand, so you cause the person to understand, trying to, meaning explain. Whereas in Spanish, they would say, give me to understand. And we're all trying to ask for information, for an explanation, but the one person is saying to give me to understand means give me information to make the matter clearer, but the other person is saying make me to understand, which is to cause me to understand by your explanation. I see that also in African languages where we we used to have that problem when we were growing up learning English, where in most African languages, consuming money or spending money would be to eat the money. In Hausa language, we say ya chikudina, and you would have that also in the pidgin English, say he chopped my money. Now, chop my money is actually very funny because in standard English, the word chop means to cut up into pieces, but in pidgin, it means to chew into pieces, which we're actually breaking down both ways. So you chopped somebody's money, which means you spent someone's money, So, and in English essays, when we had to write articles, we would, somebody, a child would write, he ate my money to kind of standardize the language, So those were the direct translation. Another translation that we used to have, that we have in our culture, would show you that certain habits were not integral or familiar in our culture, is where we would say, to say kiss. The word kiss, like in my mother's language, Hausa, we say they drank their lips. And I found that also in Spanish, I found that in Spanish literature that they also say the same thing, where you drink the leaves like the way you would water or suck. So you would do the same thing, and that is how we explain the word kiss. What that has made me realize is that the more languages you understand, meaning you can understand it and translate, you get a concept, the better understanding you have of a person, of what certain words mean to a person, of what certain actions will mean to a person, because the language reflects the culture of those people. Okay, so you will find out that in Africa we have been influenced by so many cultures, so many, because of the influx and outflux of languages coming across. Like before the arrival of the white man, it was how do you call it, kingdom wars, this kingdom against the other kingdom, and so the languages began to mix or trade. For example, in Nigeria, you would go to the south, the Hausa man went to the south, and he says albasa, which is onions, but now the Yoruba say alubosa, So we begin to borrow words, and we begin to see how far this thing. The Igbos, where I come from, we call them Nyamari, which tells you that when they arrived in the north, because of the climate, they were forced to ask for water, and they said Nyemiri, and so we call them Nyamari, we say Nyamari, so and that is how you get those things. But I know that has really given us, again, like I said, thanks to intercultural practices, thanks to commerce, thanks to the advent of technology, thanks to the arrival of the white man also, we have been forced to be displaced from our natural habitats to foreign habitats. So people from the north go to the east or vice versa to different parts of the country, and marriages occur, businesses are formed, friendships are formed, and we interact, exchanging even our languages, which makes it very easy for us. I think when we go to the diaspora, it makes it quite easy for us to learn the language of the new community where we live in, so to speak. So um, when I came here, people were really surprised by how I could speak so fast. I could learn Spanish so fast. But it was just thanks to the fact that I had a basic of, I had a foundation in French language. So because they are all Romance language, my ears were pricked up because I come from this culture where there are so many sounds that mean something that we use to transmit messages. I could easily begin to pick similar sounds in both languages. So they would say something like palabra, in French it would be parole, la fenêtre, ventana, okay, so the there, you begin to pick out similarity in sounds, and quickly you learn. It's the same thing for Africans when we go to a place like Germany or the Netherlands. You quickly begin to pick root words that are similar in English language, and you learn, and so you learn that, and with the expressions you learn faster their culture and things like that. I did a video in my language on my language channel, La Autodidacta, Donna Autodidacta, about that thing where you begin, a word not just means the dictionary meaning, you begin to get the connotation of a word, and through that connotation you begin to understand people better. For example, there was there was this video of this lady who said we should rally against God. What she was saying was not necessarily that we should go against God, but I think she was saying we should come together to cry, to provoke God, sort of, to stir up his compassion towards his people. But the words she was using, completely botched the meaning of what she was trying to put across. Okay, so um, that is one way that languages has really helped me to understand people. To say, she may not, nobody in their right senses who is religious, who has a reverence for God, would say you should rise up against him, but rather we should call on him with an intensity. So many people always ask that. Like here, they always ask, how come people speak so many languages? I remember when I arrived newly, they would literally be reading my lips. Worst of all was when someone called me and I had to speak in my native language. It was the most, how can I explain? I don't know, the most funny time, the most funny moment in my life, because they were literally looking at my lips like this to see why the sound I was producing didn't sound like any sound they had ever heard. I was a big spectacle, you know. So that is why we are, that is just what makes us the same. It's because of our languages. Every country has over, okay, both language, there are countries that I come from, the Congo and Nigeria, we have over 200 languages. And so you will find that in the diaspora. It's because we come from, we back home, we have our languages, we still practice them. If your parents don't teach you, your grandparents will insist that at least you understand the basic aspects of your language, and that helps us when we migrate to other places to quickly learn the language of our new homes. All right, so that is it for today. I didn't intend to speak on that, but I was just thinking about why people always wonder why it's easy for, or easier, so to say, for Africans to learn a second language. And by second language, I mean a foreign language that is, It's because back home, generally, most of us are bilingual minimum. So if your parents come from the same tribe, you will speak the same language. And then if you are living or growing in another place different from your place of origin, you would learn the language of that place. So hope that makes sense. Wishing you the very best for the rest of your weekend and for a new week ahead. And I'll see you guys next weekend. Bye bye.